Hey guys, what is going on? Anthony here with Pistons Talk. Hope you guys are having a great night so far. What I wanted to do in today's video was react to this Detroit Bad Boys 6 candidates to replace Monty Williams if the Pistons move on. Now, why are we reacting to an article about potential coaching candidates when we have a head coach in Monty Williams? Well, I'm not entirely sure he's going to be the head coach of this basketball team going into next season. We still haven't had a press conference with Trajan Langdon. Trajan has decided to move on from Troy Weaver. He's added some front office execs in Blackstone and J.R. Holden. I think this is going to be a very good opportunity to see what type of coaching candidates the Pistons could possibly go after if they do decide to go in that direction. And I think there are some names in this list that you guys are familiar with. There are other names that maybe you haven't really heard of, and that's perfectly fine. There are names in this article that I've never heard of. And like I said, I do this like every day, do a podcast once a week. We're not going to know every assistant coach or every up-and-coming coach in the NBA, but should be a fun video. So let's get straight into it. All right, so the first name in this article is a guy that needs no introduction. It's JJ Redick. Whether you guys consume his podcast, his 50 podcasts that the guy has, whether you're listening to the NBA Finals right now and him broadcasting with Doris Burke and Mike Breen, or whether you watched him growing up playing at Duke and playing in the NBA. This guy is all over the place in the NBA right now. He's a media darling, if you will. Now, I don't know what reporting's true. I don't know if the Dan Hurley stuff was true with Woj. I don't know if the JJ Redick is the Lakers' head candidate from Shams. It's really weird, and I know Sean does kind of talk about this in his article. But one thing I did want to focus on, what he wrote, and I think he hit the nail on the head, said if the Pistons want a young coach with a moderate take on winning in the NBA and are willing to bet on a guy looking to prove himself, Redick would be a real candidate. On the other hand, that description applies to the more experienced candidates. This is the part where I really agree with Sean. It says, while Redick would garner headlines, the Pistons need to fight the urge to win the news cycle and instead hire the best coach for this year and 5 years from now. 100% agree with Sean here. I don't know if JJ Redick's going to be a good coach. I don't think any of us know if he's qualified to be a head coach. He sounds really smart in this podcast. The way he breaks down the game, the way he breaks down plays with current and former NBA players on his podcast, the way he breaks down games, calling them this year with TNT and in the NBA Finals. I'm not discrediting his basketball knowledge whatsoever because I know he's 1,000% smarter than me when it comes to basketball knowledge. I just question, if the Pistons were to really zero it in on JJ Redick, and there's the talent connection there, he used to represent JJ when he was a player, could JJ go from being a broadcaster to a head coach to one of the worst teams in basketball in the Detroit Pistons right now? Could he figure out Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey backcourt? Could he figure out how to get Durham more locked into the defensive end? Could he figure out Asar Thompson and how to use him? I don't know. And I think a lot of us don't know. My thing with Redick is, if you go out and get him, you got to sell the fans' patience. So the next candidate in this article is James Borrego. Now, he's another popular name that you guys have probably heard of. Most recently, he was in New Orleans as an associate coach under Willie Green with the Pelicans. So you have a Trajan Langdon connection with James Borrego. Now, his head coaching experience, the last head coaching job he had was with the Charlotte Hornets for a few seasons. Obviously, Charlotte decided to go in a different direction and hire Steve Clifford. That didn't work out, and we saw this spring, if you will, they decided to hire Charles Lee. Now, I honestly think James Borrego, the Pistons are taking too long if they want to make a head coaching decision, if they want to go in a different direction, because I honestly think the Lakers are knocking on the door. It's been reported by Shams. It's been reported by others. The Cavs are knocking on the door. The Cavs are without a coach right now, and he's a finalist for that job. The Cavs, I believe, have two or three finalists. I don't remember all of them off the top of my head, but if you're the Pistons And this is Trajan Langdon's guy. This is a guy that maybe he thinks that can get the Pistons back to relevancy, get the Pistons back to competing, get the Pistons winning more than 14 games a season. You got to go out and try to go get them. Again, if you do want to make coaching changes, I just think he's going to be gone by the time the Pistons get around to it, personally. We still haven't had a press conference. I know this is all speculative, but I honestly think if this is your guy, you have to make a move with him this week to try to at least get a chance to talk to the guy. So the third candidate in this article is David Adelman from the Denver Nuggets. Now, he's the lead assistant under Mike Malone over in Denver. And Denver had a very potent offense this past season. This is what Sean has to say about David Adelman. David Adelman would be a big swing on a hot up-and-coming assistant. He would come cheaper than more established options, which I agree with. I think if you go after the Reddicks, you go after the Borregos, the Kenny Atkinsons, as he mentions in this article, they're going to be a little bit more pricey because they're established. Outside of Redick, I think Redick would be just more expensive because who he is. Not that he has experience. I do want to say that because I'm sure someone will comment that. But Sean also goes on to say Adelman is the son of former NBA coach Rick Adelman, and he seems to have inherited plenty of schematic creativity from his dad. Adelman is currently the lead assistant under Mike Malone in Denver, and he is credited with a lot of the Nuggets' offense attacks. And look, you're always going to look like an offensive wizard if you're running your offense through Nikola Jokic. However, leaning into Jokic's strengths and maximizing the flexibility, he gives you the best passing big man of all time. Adelman is an NBA lifer thanks to being the son of a coach, and he knows offense. The Pistons are desperate for someone who knows offense at an elite level. Again, like if you want to go after a top assistant, if you want to go after a guy that was the offensive coordinator, if you will, of the Denver Nuggets. And Denver had a top 5 offense this year. They look great. You want to go after a guy that is responsible for a lot of that offense, the brain, if you will, behind the Denver Nuggets. I'm for it. I really am. I'm open to anything right now. And I know some of you guys probably are too. I wouldn't hate this hire if the Pistons were to decide to move on from Monty, but he is a name that I did want to talk about for a couple of minutes in this article. So the fourth candidate in this article is Chris Quinn. Now, that name probably sounds familiar. He was a candidate to interview with the Detroit Pistons head coaching vacancy last year when the Pistons did move on from Dwayne Casey. This is what Sean has to say about Chris Quinn as possibly a head coach candidate. If you're looking for a little heat culture Detroit, Chris Quinn is your man. He just finished his 10th season as an assistant coach in Miami and has risen to the level where he's now a fill-in head coach when Eric Spoelstra is forced to miss a game. Quinn is heavily involved in Miami's player development program. And one of the failings you can point to in Detroit in the past decade plus is the inability to have an established program that helps young players eliminate weakness and build strengths. Honestly, Sean just hit the nail on the head. Like, I was having this conversation the other day in our Detroit Pistons group chat. Like, the Pistons really have not developed any draft picks or any two-way guys or any undrafted free agents. I can't think the last player that we've actually like said, oh yeah, we developed them. Like, I just can't. Getting a guy that really is great at developing, has a program, has been a former player. He's been under Spo for 10 plus years. He's learned under Pat Riley, I'm sure. This is a guy that is, long overdue to be a head coach in the NBA whenever the time is right. And I think if you're the Pistons and you want to bank on maybe a up-and-coming head coaching candidate, an assistant that has paid his dues, I think Chris Quinn should be their guy. I think he should be really high on the pecking order of, if you do want to move on from Monty and you're looking for a guy that is younger, he has development background, I really think Chris Quinn should be a guy that the Pistons try to look at. So the fifth coaching candidate in this article is Kenny Atkinson. Now, a lot of you guys know who Kenny Atkinson is. He was part of that Brooklyn Nets team that he led to the playoffs. And that's what Sean says in his article. He said he has a reputation of creating a quality development atmosphere and getting the most out of talents of his rotation. He's also spent the past 3 seasons as a lead assistant in Golden State under Steve Kerr. If there is a knock on Atkinson, it would be that he's already 57 years old and has seemed to resist the urge to jump back into the head coaching gauntlet if it was in service or an extremely young, developing team. I mean, there is some key points that Sean does make. Like, he's been in Golden State for 3 years, and there's been plenty of head coaching openings. He just hasn't really gotten into doing that. Maybe there's something there. Maybe there isn't. Maybe he'd like to get the opportunity to coach a young team like the Detroit Pistons. I don't know. I think there's a lot of questions there with him. I think he's a name that a lot of you guys like, and I understand that. I do like the fact that he does have a strong development background, much like Chris Quinn. If you look at those Brooklyn Nets teams that didn't really have a whole lot of talent but still competed, still made the playoffs, I think of a Piston fan, you'd probably want that. You'd want a guy that could relate to these guys, motivate them, get them ready to play for him. Honestly, I wouldn't be mad at Kenny Atkinson if he was willing to leave Golden State, if he was willing to accept the job, because if you guys remember, I think it was last year or the year before, I don't remember. He was supposedly supposed to take the Hornets job, and he backed out of it. And then they hired Steve Clifford last year. Who's to say he couldn't do something similar if he were to interview for the Pistons job? And he's like, I don't know, because we don't know what everything went down with Charlotte. Maybe it was he was kind of having some second thoughts. Maybe he was more comfortable being in Golden State. Being a lead assistant under Kerr, coaching a veteran team, coaching a team that has, playoff aspirations, where the Pistons right now are just trying to not, finish in 15th place again. But I think Kenny Atkinson would be a good name if you're a Piston fan to look out for. The 6th and final candidate in this article from the Detroit Bad Boys is Micah Nori. Now, Micah Nori was in Detroit under Dwayne Casey. He was one of his lead assistants, right? Currently, he's with the Minnesota Timberwolves under Chris Finch. So he's been an assistant for quite some time, and even before his Detroit days, he was in Denver with Mike Malone. So he's been around the NBA. He's been an assistant for quite some time. He's another top assistant. Now, does he want to be a head coach? We don't know. His name has been linked to the Cavs job, possibly as a finalist for that job. I honestly don't really know if he would have interest coming back to Detroit. I think if he were to take a head coaching job, this is just my opinion personally, I could be wrong here. I think he'd much rather try to take a job like Cleveland that has a roster that's ready to compete versus a Detroit where they have the pieces, but they still need to be developed, and they still need a couple more years to grow chemistry together. Get more adults in the room with all the cap space that we do have this summer. I think Mike and Nori, to me personally, just from my outside perspective, not being a T-Wolves fan, I think he'd much rather go to a job like Cleveland. It's a little bit more attractive than Detroit, but I could be wrong there, though. Let me know what you guys think of these head coaching candidate list. If Monty Williams is, quote-unquote, let go by the Detroit Pistons, is there any candidate on this list that you absolutely love? Is there maybe a candidate on this list that was not mentioned in the article? Drop it down below in the comment section. We'll talk to you guys down there. Like always, hope you guys are staying safe. Take care. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.